a lot of what I'm doing in this particular role is helping to source projects that are so interdisciplinary that they don't necessarily fit into like sustainability versus social impact, or like climate versus city design versus public health. It's like, we're kind of past all that, right? We're like, we have to have all these different experts kind of collaborating. No one person is quote unquote in charge of the deliverable. It's more like, hey, how do we cultivate an individual project team that can coherently and lovingly and meticulously delve into the really, really challenging questions and then come up with incredibly bold, I would go so far as to say visionary potential solutions.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Inner Wealth, the Forbes Ignite podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Cacal, CEO of Forbes Ignite, and every week I'll be sharing with you my conversations with unique, creative, and innovative people across all different industries. These are people who are intellectually curious explorers who are also redefining what it means to be successful today. From personal to professional, we cover it all to understand what drives our guests to blaze their own trails and create nimble solutions within the industries that touch each of our lives. Our guest today is Dr. Sara Murdock, the Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Impact Officer at ESG Strategies. Among all the other hats she wears, she is a world-renowned expert in power dynamics and leadership, with over 20 years of experience in the fields of ESG and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I was honored to speak and bounce around ideas with her about things like organizational design and business anthropology. We talk about everything from organizational frameworks to the need for new ways that organizations can enable their employees to create impact. I know you're gonna love what she has to say. Here's our chat. Hey, Sara, how's it going? Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. And oh my goodness, I can't think of a person I'd rather have a chat with than you on a Tuesday after a long weekend. So glad to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know we got introduced by a mutual friend of ours, and I'm so appreciative of the introduction because we both work somewhat in the same space. And I'd love to learn more about your story. But before we dive into that, what have you been up to lately?
I suppose lately I've been an enthused bridge builder. I feel like I still hear a lot of differentiations between sort of business versus nonprofit versus community work versus policy. And I kind of don't buy it, right? It's like great leaders doing great work are great leaders doing great work. I don't really care how they file their taxes. You know what I mean?
That's a good one.
Yeah. So a very enthused bridge builder, both with my own projects and then also making as many kind of just introductions and almost intuitively introducing people to one another if I think that they might really enjoy each other.
No, that's great. I love people like that because as humans, we want more of that human connection. And especially for the past 2 years, we've been kind of missing that. So the more intellectual conversations we can have, the better. Mm-hmm. So I really, really appreciate that. So tell us about your story because you wear many, many hats. So
I do.
Love to learn more about your personal and your professional journey.
Thank you. Yeah. So it is funny because a lot of folks are like, wait, are you an entrepreneur? Or no, you're like a philanthropy professional. Oh, no, wait, no, you've worked in research. Oh, you're an academic. Oh, no, you're a thought leader. I'm like, just pick whichever one you feel like, and I don't mean it to sound heavy because it could, but I do think that insisting that folks wear only one or two hats is the same type of essentializing we like to do with gender and race and ability and, geographic location. It's like, hey, I can do many things and I'm sure you can too, right? Let's celebrate that sort of multiplicity. So here's a sort of funny thing about my background. When I was a young whippersnapper, I actually first began, I would call it project management at the time, through choreography.
Oh, wow.
And when I was quite young, I learned to build teams, have an idea, see it through from scratch, produce it for, an audience, a consumer base, if you will. It didn't occur to me at that point in time, as a teen and sort of, early, very, very early 20s, that I was learning to lead, to project manage, to fund, right? To, prepare an event and a product for the general public. And I share this in part because I do think that many leaders have just incredible skill sets and are not always taught to celebrate those if they don't look a certain way. And again, I love this path as well, not knocking anybody, but it's like, you don't have to get an MBA and then go be a managing director at a big four to be a tremendous leader catalyzing all sorts of change. So
I think that's really fascinating because I come from a musical background as well. So I have a huge appreciation for those who have worked in the arts before. But I feel like you were saying, those are a lot of transferable skills. I mean, there has to be a better term than transferable skills. It's so much more than that because you're being a leader by recognizing the skills and the talents of your team and translating that into something that's tangible that people can experience. And so great leaders do that just the same, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're working for a nonprofit, what have you. So I really do appreciate that.
Definitely. I would even go so far as to say, pro tip for anybody who's in talent pipeline work or just anybody who's building a team, go find a prolific artist. Because if you want somebody who's good with ambiguity and vision, oh my gosh.
Yes, absolutely.
You'll find it in the arts. So there you go.
I love it. I love it. So after that, where did your path continue to go?
It's really a little bit funny in retrospect. I ended up doing what we now call intergroup dialogue for quite some time.
Okay.
We also sometimes use, inclusion and belonging, like those types of names or nomenclature. In essence, I began doing this work actually through dance originally because I was quite young at the time, and it didn't occur to me to be nervous working with like business leaders or people 3, 4, 5 times my age with so much more money, right? It didn't occur to me if my objective was to bring people together to communicate. And I did this first through like theater games, right? Through getting folks in, big public parks and in auditoriums and community centers and, also like some sort of standard office buildings and whatnot to get to know each other, right? It was sort of like team building stuff. Again, I was very, very young at the time, so I didn't have a lot of the wording, the sort of phrasing then. But I sort of, began to cut my teeth in sort of facilitation and in intercultural and intersectoral communications in that way. Then as I sort of got a little bit of mentorship and feedback and figured out things I could do much, much, much better, it really turned into, what we now think of as kind of formalized team building, right? Formalized communications, formalized certainly inclusion and belonging work. But, again, that's just sort of another call or invitation for folks to get creative in terms of how we think of, what does it mean to build a great culture? What does it mean to be a great people leader? It doesn't necessarily mean having like a certain certification. It means, can you actually get people together to have the hard conversations and to be radically solutions oriented? That's really what it takes.
Exactly. And I love that because I was just about to say, you must be an expert in design thinking because there's so much of that aspect of bringing people together. And there's a book that I can't quite remember the exact name of it, but it's like Universal Methods of Design. And it's like 101 different creative ways to bring people together to get the creative juices flowing. And that's exactly what you were already doing. It just wasn't called design thinking.
Right. Yes. No, that's 100% true. And it's funny because after about 6 years of that work, I did go get a master's degree in organizational development and formally studied systems thinking and human-centered design and all that stuff. It's like, oh, there's names for this. What do you know? And again, I don't say that because like I'm so clever. I think it's just a matter of we can all do better at recognizing skill in shapes and formats and situations that don't necessarily kind of fit that cookie cutter, like, oh, you have a master's degree in design thinking, which is great too, right? But it's not like a one or the other. So
no, exactly. So throughout your journey, what has inspired you and who are some of your role models?
Thank you for that. So one thing is I'm super inspired by young people. So, for all that stuff I was just referencing, I was very, very young when I was doing that, and now that I hate this term, but the quote unquote mid-career professional, I feel like I sound like a half-baked loaf of bread when I say that, like I've got about 20 years of work under my belt, but I hope I have at least, 20, 25 more, knock on wood. But no, I'm just really, really inspired by young people. I feel like the sort of younger millennials, Gen Z, they know what's up these days. I honestly call my younger colleagues just as much or more often, if I'm really honest, than some of my more seasoned colleagues. And again, it's not an intelligence thing. It's like there's a certain sort of chutzpah and just hunger for doing things with joy, for doing things that just work better. That thought of like, oh, well, it's worked okay, I guess, is like, why the hell would you keep doing something that works okay, I guess?
Right.
Do we have to wait for it to be a flaming disaster before we look for something, some other way forward? So I love the creativity. I love just the willingness to try. There's like a serious kind of entrepreneurial, and even I would say go so far as to like scientific mindset of like, you don't know unless you try, and then you learn something and you can, iterate based on your learning. So yeah, young people.
Absolutely. We did some research at Forbes Ignite on something very, very similar to mentorship. We don't quite have the word for it because we found in our research that the best mentor-mentee relationships were always a two-way street. And they weren't really mentor-mentee
right.
Hierarchy. It wasn't really like that. It was a two-way street. One person got as much from the experience just as much as the other. And it was an exchange of information. And it was such a great relationship. And so we found that through our research, and we tried to discover how could we enable more of that in our work.
I love that.
So I'm sure you know more about this based on your studies, based on your work. So can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Well, okay, then everyone's like, all right, enough with all that 20s stuff. What have you been doing now that you're a real adult, right? I'm like, first of all, the reason why I start with when I was so young is because I actually really think that all those steps were necessary, right? I actually think all that experience was incredibly cultivating. That said, I did go on to get a doctorate, and my emphasis was, and still is to this day, intercultural effectiveness. So that can mean many different things. I mentioned dialogue before. That's a huge one. Learning to interact productively. And I don't say this to be glib, actually, but in ways that we will be less violent and kill each other less. Like, that's everything. That is absolutely everything in this day and age. Unfortunately, I kind of wish it were an outdated concept, but it's very, very necessary. But in addition to that sort of anti-violence, pro-cooperation, pro-peace, pro-solutioning, to me, again, and I swear I'm going to connect this to your point, it really comes down to, I will go so far as to say, old-fashioned, outdated, and ineffective, patriarchal or patronizing ways of communicating. And again, when I say patriarchal, I don't mean like male versus female. I mean, it's about power flows, right? So you're talking about how we don't have like one mentor who's filled with genius and then an empty receptacle who's like, please, sir, please, ma'am, please inform me. Oh goodness, I'm not good enough without you kind of thing. There's more of this, hey, we're going to learn more if we can create a really robust discourse where we're both able to kind of invite and tease out of each other the deep questions. Not something I can Google, not something I can read a quick Medium article on, but something where we're actually going to grow as people, as leaders, solutioners, et cetera. So really that mutuality, that reciprocity, absolutely acknowledging, hey, I don't know how to do that. Can you help me with that? Or can you teach me that? But that's not a place of subservience, right? Or lesser than. That's actually saying, hey, I want to level up as a human and as a leader. That's an act of bravery and intelligence, right?
Right.
So how do we cultivate that on both sides, or on all sides, I should say?
I 100% agree with you, because it is intelligent to know what you don't know. How else are you going to learn? So I 100% agree with you.
Yeah. And I mean, gosh, your work sounds so interesting with mentorship. I just very, very briefly, I did a research project about 1.5 years ago now on emerging employees of color, mostly throughout the Silicon Valley region. So this was involving 30 different kind of student groups and whatnot. And one of the biggest, there's sort of several themes that came out of this, but one of the biggest themes was a desire for mentorship, right? A desire for, somebody to kind of have my back, somebody I can ask questions to. And when I asked, like, well, have you never had anything like that? I mean, is this completely, I feel like lots of people talk about mentorship, right? They're like, well, yeah, you can call it mentorship, but if I can't really ask the questions that are truly on my mind, or, I'm treated like, this little kid, and they're like, yeah, I know that I'm young, but I'm 26 and I have something to offer and I'm not an idiot. I'm trying to like level up my game here. Please don't condescend to me. So yeah, again, just to your point, cultivating leadership really has to be more mutual.
Right. Absolutely. 100% agree. So right now you are essentially a chief impact officer and chief strategy officer at ESG Strategies. So tell us more about that.
This is definitely one of my favorite roles ever, I have to say. So, I'm not an economist, right? And sort of circular economy is the hot thing on the street these days, right? But what I love about this field is that it's so multifaceted and so interdisciplinary. It's not about economics the way I was taught economics are, way back in the day. It's not just about, the micros and the macros or at the, sort of at the organizational level, like the balance sheets or just the cash, right? It really is, again, about flows of resources. Mm-hmm. And that to me is one of the best ways to track and plan for both individual organizational structures and then kind of, just what do they call them? Not like beneficial societies, but just healthy societies as a whole. That's sort of the overarching kind of type of work stream. The one other thing I'll say about this quickly before ending my yammering is the other piece that we're doing is using the latest leadership and organizational research to build what we hope is a sort of leading example for how experts can work together. Some of this actually did come out of financial necessity because we realized, hey, to get this many world-class experts sort of under one roof would be unbelievably expensive and even beyond the financial cost, probably just not realistic. Like you're not going to get that many world-class experts on one project team at any point in time quickly enough to solve the world's problems. You can collect a bunch of people at a university, which, is an environment that I love, but to solve real-time problems with the environment and human beings in active need as we speak, we don't have enough decades to accumulate people in that format and then triage and disperse so that they can do what they do best. So some of this model is saying, okay, how do we honor individual contributors and the team while also getting them on board to a given project quickly enough to do the project?
Right. No, I find that fascinating. And I love what you said about the interdisciplinary nature of the work, because it's not just the circular economy. It's not just economics. You need to bring together all the different experts working on these really systemic challenges. And I forgot what where this actually came from, but we were working on a project where we were bringing together a lot of interdisciplinary thinkers. And one person that we invited had asked, who's the product owner? And I thought to myself, we need to get out of this product mindset. This is not just product ownership or shipping out another feature or anything like that. This is solving a huge challenge, bringing together brilliant minds. And so I'm sure you've run into that before.
Yeah. I mean, so I'll harass you once I have a good video of this new talk that I'm launching this fall. But I call it from boss to leader to visionary. Now, part of the reason for kind of tracing that trajectory is because I do believe that there's a time and a place for each, right? There's a time that if we're having a moment of crisis and something's on fire, we need a boss to be like, hey, you do this. Hey, you do this. Like we got to literally put this fire out right now in this moment. So there's a time and a place. But then when I hear you talking about, there is a certain leadership element to this, like now kind of old fashioned version of management. And I think it served us well in the 80s, 90s, probably, kind of early 2000s. We see it a lot. And again, I'm trained in a lot of agile. I use agile methodologies, not throwing anybody under the bus, right? But I do think that something like a product owner, we're going to see that phase out. Like people are like throwing tomatoes at me as they're like, I just finished my certification and now I hate you. It's okay, right? Again, transferable skills, going to be okay. But having an owner of one little crevasse of the system, I don't think that's going to fly for the type of, again, I use this word solutioning a lot, that is going to get us where we need to go. And so I think, again, there's a time and a place for a leader, right? There's a time and a place to say, hey, this 7-person team needs to do blah, blah, blah by this date. Let's have you lead the, calendar portion of that or whatever, right? There's always a time and a place. But I think the future of effective teaming, the future of, I don't even know if I want to use the M word, but effective management, really just the future of effective organizations is going to be in this sort of prioritizing the vision and just being just wildly uncompromising when it comes to sinking our teeth in to building what works rather than trying to acclimate what we're doing to old-fashioned management systems just because we're more comfortable there.
Right, right. Let me know if I'm interpreting this correctly, but you're seeing that the future is going to be more of a flatter structure.
Yes, and well, all my theater people are like, yeah, woohoo, yes, and. But yes, and the only challenge I'll say about use, and please, I'm not picking on you. I hear like flat organization or matrix organization all the time. Like people have been doing that for a while. I'm like, yeah, but calling it that is not the same as doing that. Mm-hmm. And that to me is where I don't see us actually living out what we're talking about. And again, I don't say this to like throw shade at anybody, right? It's like change is difficult and it can take us a while to say, I might say like, hey, I want to eat greens every day of my life. And I might not actually succeed in that for a long time. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I don't know why I just use greens. The kale in my fridge is like, woohoo. But yeah, it's the flatness. Okay. How can I say this? I think it's been popular more recently because folks are like, oh, well, we want to find some way to signal that like we're a cool organization, or I'm a cool boss, or I'm woke, or I'm inclusive. And talking about being matrix or talking about, oh, my door is open anytime doesn't actually mean that you're making decisions that are empowering your employees. Mm-hmm. Having somebody who makes 1/100th of what you do be able to knock on your door and talk to you for 30 seconds does not actually mean that you are cultivating that person's career actively. Just saying.
Yeah. No, what I love the most about that is there needs to be different names for this because it's moving so fast. Things are changing very quickly. We hear about, ad nauseum, we hear about the Great Resignation or the Great Shift or whatever you want to call it. And so there's going to be a new structure or new frameworks that are going to be developed. And I know in our last conversation, you were talking to me about an organizational management framework that you've been developing. So tell us about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks for kind of rolling with the punches on that. I didn't mean to like overly criticize that one phrase that you used. Yeah. So I think when it comes to this organizational structure, we're sort of playing with two things in parallel. One I sort of alluded to, right, with sourcing just top tier experts in their field. But when we say experts, it's not only a matter of a degree, right, or X number of years. It's somebody who has the ability to build from scratch and to make friends with the problem and to make friends with the process and the ambiguity. That to us is just as, if not more important than like, oh, you've got XYZ credential or you've got X years working for this big firm or something like that. So yeah, so that's an absolutely central component. The other piece of it is, and this, I'm not going to lie, this has been a little challenging simply because folks, it's like, they like the idea, but I'm like, I don't think I get it. So there's a certain amount of having to give up control, right? Mm-hmm. So what we think of usually as an organizational structure does still have a chief executive of some form or an executive of some form, sort of sits at the top and, kind of presides over everything else. In this model, we're sort of trying to build in checks and balances, much like a participatory democracy, where yes, there are absolutely still sort of functions that are responsible for kind of maintaining and stewarding something on an ongoing basis, because, you have to, like, my brain is tired enough as is, right? Like, I don't want to be responsible for everything. That sounds terrible. So you're sort of responsible for cultivating that function, but then no one person gets to swoop in and be like, okay, heard you, but actually we're doing this because your idea is terrible and I said so. Obviously most people don't phrase things that way, but nobody gets to just come in and totally bulldoze over another function. Part of the reason this is working for us so far is because we are all indeed so radically solution oriented that we're not there to like exercise our ego. And so nobody's led by that like, well, I found the answer, so we're just going to do it this way, because it's just not how we work. Mm-hmm. So all of that is to say, a huge part of the model is sourcing people who work based on a certain ethos. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm like, I hope this is making sense. I feel like I need a flow chart. So the one other piece to this that I'll mention is that all of this begins long before actually agreeing to work together. And that might be the biggest single thing that I still don't see most organizations doing. Like there's a thought of like, oh, talent pipeline and, finding like a good, resource for smart people or whatever. But it's really getting to know how the person works and what makes them tick. That is going to be, I think that's going to be so integral to the future of work that organizations that don't invest in that relationship building are going to fall radically behind, no matter whether they're hiring smart people or not.
Right.
Yeah. So it's almost like how somebody works is just as important as what they do.
Absolutely. What I love was you need to develop the ethos or communicate the ethos before you decide to work together. Mm-hmm. And of the million different experiments that I've thought of in my mind that I wish we could execute, but there's time and capacity that we're dealing with. One of the experiments that I thought would be really cool would be, and I think you might relate to this because of your theater background. What if there was a way to audition certain roles in a working environment where you don't necessarily know that the people that you are working on a project with are your potential coworkers? They could be something related to the circular economy, and people could audition for certain roles and see if they like it or not, because it's a two-way street, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know, just something I'm throwing out there.
I think that's so cool. That's so cool. Okay, in my experience, when you talk to people about finding a role, they would much rather find something that's a really, really good fit for them. There's just this sort of assumption like, oh, I have to go through the usual rigmarole and then I'm placed in a thing and then I'll probably find out 6 months in that I actually hate it here, but that's life. You know what I mean? I'm being a little bit glib to make a point. But yeah, I mean, gosh, if there were an opportunity to be compensated to kind of like trial things out, that would be incredible. I am wondering if there's going to be sort of more, I don't know, maybe like fellowships or kind of, like on-ramp types of projects. I think that might be an incredible way to build a structure like that. My only thing is that there's a stigma, at least in North America, there's a stigma around something like fellowships. It's sort of like, oh, that's what you do when you're like too junior in your career kind of thing. So maybe we need like sexier nomenclature so that people are like, oh, you got the such and such thing. Like, that's so prestigious, what I mean? That shows you can really, work on important projects on the fly.
Yeah. If there's one thing that I'm taking away from this conversation, it's that we need better names for all the different new structures, new managerial capacities. We just need new names for better things. So that's something I'll be pondering about a lot.
I can't wait to hear what you come up with.
That'll come on our next podcast episode, definitely.
That sounds good. There's just one other thing I wanted to mention about this org structure that we're kind of experimenting with. So as I mentioned, I'm a recovering academic. And one of the things that I love about academia is that there's sort of a release of the experts employed there. It's sort of a funny juxtaposition because on the one hand, it's extremely hierarchical, extremely rigid, extremely old-fashioned. I'm always like, hey, academia, if you need some help, give me a call. You know what I mean? But, it can be so painfully antiquated. And yet something that it's always done from the get-go is hired the best and the brightest in a very niche field, and then said, hey, as long as you're, doing the research you're supposed to do or teaching classes you're supposed to teach or doing the administrative work you're supposed to do, go do whatever else. In fact, not just we'll let you, but we will brag about you, sing your praises, compensate you further, be stoked about you, probably promote you faster if you are going out and doing other things. It could be huge other things actually that don't really even name our university that much. It might just be mostly under your name. We don't care. Go do them. It makes us look really, really good. And that's one of the places where I'm like, companies, if you don't get with that, you are effed. Like you're not going to be able to attract or hold on to top talent. You're not going to be able to attract or hold on to people who are out there making the world a better place. If you want people like Nicole, if you want people like Sara, you actually have to be like, oh my God, Nicole, you are literally brilliant. We could not be more excited to have you. I know you're not actually looking for a job, but still. I know that you're like leading your own firm, but just bear with me here. But like, we are going to pay you a boatload of money, support you in all these different ways. And every time you go out and you give a keynote or you write a new book or you go for this grant or whatever, we're going to sing your praises from the rooftops. That is what companies need to be doing.
Exactly. And it's so funny how much a lot of organizations don't realize this. I feel like the writings are on the wall. It just requires people to call it out. So I'm really thankful that you're calling it out right now.
It's a win-win. And the only thing I can even think of it's either just, I don't know, it hasn't happened either because of business as usual, maybe, which is the world's worst excuse if you're an innovation, company, or it's fear, right? Like if we don't control them, they might realize how brilliant they are and leave. But no, I mean, think about the controlling, spouse or partner. Like nobody wants to be with that guy or that gal. You want to be with the partner who's like, they're so foxy, they can go out and get a date any day of the week, but they choose to come home with me. You know what I mean? Like that's how companies need to be thinking.
Right. They need to be more supportive and think more holistically about the person, not the cog in the wheel. So I love that. So among the many hats that you wear, one thing that really piqued my interest was business anthropologist. And I love this discipline. So I was hoping you could expand upon that.
Thanks for pointing that out. So this started to be part of my identity during my master's degree.
Okay.
Because when I realized that I'm a great systems thinker, again, somebody had to like tell me that. But when I realized that, like, oh, they're right. I'm able to see massive systems. And I kind of make this, because I know this is audio, like I'm making this huge gesture with my arms because it feels like that way in my mind, right? Like I can literally see these just massive systems. I can see all the sort of constituent pieces. And it's because I sort of ferret around for them. You know what I mean? Like an anthropologist, you're going to go, say like a cultural anthropologist is going to go to a city and like get to know the city. Right? There's an old anthropologist called Victor Turner that's famous for the very academic phrase, I say it with a wink. He says, yeah, the role of an anthropologist is deep hanging out, right? That's ethnography, deep hanging out. So you go to in some cases it might be a geographic location. You go to this organization and you like hang out with it until you see every single piece. You see all of the ways in which information and power and sort of job functionality flows between all the different pieces. And then you can sort of celebrate it in its totality, but you can also go in with a scalpel and say like, hey, we have a bottleneck here. Let's kind of figure out how to make this work better. Or you can go and you can say, wow, this is a profound leverage point. This like 3-person comms team over here is like a profound leverage point. And if we can really amplify and blow them up, they're going to enhance these 15 other functions. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I think of it, as like understanding the whole system just from kind of getting to know it, almost like a friend or something like that. And then being able to kind of zoom in and like dig up these little bits and pieces and like help them talk to each other. So yeah, I kind of stole that from the systems thinking realm.
That is brilliant. No, I really, really love that. And I love how you described it as deep hanging out. I mean, who doesn't love to hang out? So anyone can be an anthropologist if they really, really wanted to be. And I really feel like it's such an important field. So thank you.
Yeah, I guess just the one other piece that I should have said and failed to is that so much of this work tends to be just in the intellect, right? Just in the mind. And the reason why I use the word anthropology and not simply like organizational design or organizational effectiveness is because there is an element of the senses. So there's an element of, quite literally like smell and taste and touch and feel. Even if people are like, oh, I only work remotely, everything's on Zoom, all that sounds like a crock a hooey. Even something like your website is a culture, right? Your website has a culture. And if you kind of hang out with it a bit, you'll start to see, well, what does this evoke from me? And what is this teaching me? So even that, in this sort of flat, glistening medium, even that does. But certainly if anything with an office building or anything face-to-face is going to have the other sensory input as well.
Absolutely. Now, I'm really curious because I ask this question to all of my guests on the podcast, and I'm really curious to hear what your answer is. But how do you define success?
Two ways. One is 100% internal. It is my job to ensure that Sara is a happy, healthy human. And that doesn't mean I can't ask for help. Again, I think that that's an act of bravery and leadership, but I meditate a lot. And to me, that is a huge part of ensuring that I have the internal fortitude and resilience and softness to interact holistically with the world. So I guess just cultivating my own sort of personhood and ensuring that I'm showing up in an authentic and profound way. So that to me is sort of the foundation. And then I guess just out in the world, how much value am I adding? And that's not always easy to quantify necessarily, but one single metric like people coached or dollars earned or programs launched, it's like, okay, that's data, that's information. But success to me is at any given week, how much value am I capable of adding or giving? That to me is like the ultimate success barometer.
Absolutely. And beyond just adding value, how much are you enabling others to add value as well? And I feel like you do that a lot with your work. So I feel like that compounds and it just grows. So I think that's amazing.
I love that. That's so great. Yeah. Amplifying. Yeah. That's wonderful.
That's the word I was looking for, amplifying. Well, Sara, It was such a pleasure speaking with you, and I cannot wait to do this again. And I learned a lot from just this one conversation. So thank you so much.
Well, kudos to you. You're a great conversationalist. So thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much. We'll do this again soon.
That's it for this week's episode of Inner Wealth. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and that you'll join us next week as we continue to explore all the ways success is being redefined in our ever-changing world. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite podcast app, and follow us on Instagram at Forbes Ignite for more thought-provoking content and opportunities to engage with us. I'm your host, Nicole Cacal. Thanks for joining us.